Welcome back to the Nerdy Grail, and welcome back to the third part in my Symbiote Saga series. Yes, this is the series where I look over Peter Parker's symbiote art through all different media, from TV shows to movies to video games, and I discuss the positives, the negatives, the design, the background, and just determine which ones I think were done well and which ones I think weren't done so well. Now, this is the third part of the series, meaning that there's two other parts before this. As you can see behind, I've got some examples of the previous two parts. So the first part that I did was on Marvel Insomniac's Spider-Man 2's Black Suit art, the game that came out back on October 20th, 2023. And I cannot believe that it's been over a year since that game came out. And it was done and handled pretty well. And then in part two, I decided to have a look at the Spider-Man 3 movie by Sam Raimi, where I said that, you know, the symbiote art was okay, but it wasn't handled greatly. And I mean, with a 2-hour window to do it in for a movie, it was a bit tight. And with villains such as Sandman and New Goblin to incorporate, it was quite tough. But in part three, I'm looking at what a lot of people would consider to be one of the best TV shows, if not the best TV show so far to feature Spider-Man. And if I'm being perfectly honest, this might be a little bit of bias straight away, but probably, debatably, could be my favourite symbiote arc of all time. But we'd have to just wait and see. What am I talking about? Well, I did hold up Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Now, it's not relating to this. However, there's a character that does cameo in this that is related to what we're doing. I am talking about the fact that we'll be looking at the Spectacular Spider-Man TV show symbiote arc. Yeah, I love this symbiote arc, so we're going to delve straight into this. And Spectacular Spider-Man does actually cameo in this movie. So, how are we going to break it down? Well, firstly, I'm going to have a little look at the background of Spectacular Spider-Man, because I think that's important for people who haven't actually watched the show. Then we're going to have a look at the design of the symbiote suit in Spectacular Spider-Man and how it's handled. And then I'm going to do something a little bit different. So instead of looking at like the relationships or how Peter changes, I'm going to do that, but because he has the symbiote for 3 different stories in this series, I'm going to look at each story individually, and we're going to have a little look at what the plots are and how Peter changes as they go along in those stories. So I think that might be quite a nice idea. But let's waste no more time. Let's jump straight into this video and discuss the symbiote arc in the Spectacular Spider-Man TV series. Right, so I said, firstly, we'll have a little look at the background of the Spectacular Spider-Man TV show. Now, I remember when this came out, and I enjoyed it. Every single episode I thought was interesting, and I thought their take on the characters was quite interesting as well, because they did it in a bit of a unique way. So the Spectacular Spider-Man TV show, it ran from the 8th of March 2008 and ended on the 18th of March 2009. So it only lasted for just over a year. It ran for about 2 seasons, and there was roughly 26 episodes in total in this series. So it was quite a short-lived series overall, and I know that people have been campaigning for it to come back, and I'm hoping and praying that because they got Spectacular Spider-Man to cameo in Across the Spider-Verse, that maybe they might consider bringing it back, because I know it was a fan-loved series, and I quite enjoy it as well. So it had a bit of a mix of elements in the show, if I'm being perfectly honest. When watching it, it's definitely obviously aimed towards younger viewers, but also at the same time, they do incorporate a few adult themes and topics into the show as well. So they sort of got the balance right in terms of being for young and also catering to older audiences who watched previous Spider-Man shows, who want to check out what the newest generation of Spider-Man is, really. So I think that was quite a good idea. And this was the 7th series to feature Spider-Man, because there was plenty of shows that came before it, and there's shows that came after it as well. So you had the 1967 Spider-Man series, the 1981 Spider-Man TV series. You had Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which I think is hilarious, if I'm being honest. Spider-Man Unlimited, which is a very unique series indeed. The 1990s Spider-Man TV series, which will probably pop up on my Symbiote Saga, so just stay tuned for that. And we had Spider-Man: The New Adventures as well. And then after this, but I'll discuss that shortly. There was more TV shows to come after Spectacular Spider-Man. Spider-Man is not gone. Don't you worry. But obviously, why was there only 2 seasons of the show if it was so loved? Well, it was cancelled. So after Walt Disney purchased Marvel Entertainment, Sony relinquished all their TV rights to Spider-Man, including animation, meaning that on April 13th, I had to write down the date for this. So on April 13th, 2010, the show was pulled, but with Disney taking over, they decided to continue with a Spider-Man show. That Spider-Man show would become Ultimate Spider-Man, which ran for a fairly long time, actually. I think it ran for about 4 or 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I quite liked it, but it was a bit weird. I'm not gonna lie. That show was a bit odd. I'll probably have to do a separate video on Ultimate Spider-Man if I'm honest. But yeah, what I like about Spectacular Spider-Man is that it focuses entirely on Peter still being in high school, so he's still quite young. He's still having to deal with not only having a social life, but trying to find work, also dealing with Spider-Man problems. So I think they do it really, really well. And this show tackles a lot of classic storylines, incorporates lots of your favourite villains. I just think overall the pacing of all the episodes was done really, really well. But we're here to talk about the symbiote, which happens at the end of season 1. The last 4 episodes of season 1 are taken up by the symbiote arc. The first 3 with Peter having the symbiote, and then the final one, Eddie Brock as Venom. Which, like I say previously in these series, I'm not talking about Venom. It's only when Peter has the symbiote. But if you would like to know what Venom looks like in Spectacular Spider-Man, if you haven't seen it, I will put a picture on screen now. So there you go. That's what Venom looks like in Spectacular Spider-Man. But now we're going to have a little deep dive into what the suit design looks like for Spectacular Spider-Man. And I think personally this is the only series that incorporates my favourite idea. Insomniac almost did it, but I think this is the show that does it the best. So let's find out what that is. Okay, so moving on to the design of Spectacular Spider-Man's symbiote stroke black suit. I mentioned it in my Insomniac Marvel Spider-Man 2 symbiote arc one, that the symbiote goes through a couple of stages of how it looks. In particular in Insomniac, 2 stages. The black suit and then the symbiote suit, where you see as Peter's personality starts to change due to the influence of the symbiote and how he gets more and more taken over by the alien costume, how the suit reflects that change. And I did briefly mention Spectacular Spider-Man back then, saying how I think Insomniac missed 1 step of the costume, but Spectacular Spider-Man did all 3. So there is 3 different versions of the black suit in Spectacular Spider-Man, and you see that in each of the episodes, which I will discuss a little bit more when we get into the episodes, but I will briefly talk about it here, since I am talking about design. So when you first see the black suit, it is literally, and I'll put a picture on screen, it is literally a carbon copy of the red and blue suit, right down to all the patterns of the webbing. It is practically the exact same. And in the episode that the symbiote comes in, it literally does just go over the top of the red and blue suit. You can see it going over the red and blue suit. And when Peter eventually takes it off, the red and blue suit's underneath it still. But yeah, so it's literally a carbon copy, and Peter's more or less just mentally in control. It's almost like nothing's happened. Almost like he's just got a power boost, really, which is sort of what the point is to start with. Is it starts off with Peter just being fully in control, fully, being able to control all these powers, but feeling the boost from it, sort of getting him addicted to wanting to keep it. That's the idea, and then slowly it will change him as time goes on. So that's the first design of it, and I think it's brilliant, and it looks really sleek and cool. And I like that the webs in the episode as well turn from white to black as the transition between the red and black suit happens. I think that's really, really cool as well, and a good little design. But yeah, so that's the first design of it. I think it looks really good, and I wish Insomniac had done that in theirs, had just a full-on, literally carbon copy, but just a black variant of the Advanced 2.0 suit. I think that would have looked really nice. Then, in the second episode, so as time has obviously passed a little bit, a couple of days or whatever has passed with Peter having the black suit, you get this second variant of the suit, where you can see he's still got a lot of the webbing, But in particular, in the center, the webbing seems to have vanished, and the spider logo, where it was originally just his normal spider logo, has now started to branch out a little bit and get a bit bigger. Peter also notices some changes as well. He's starting to lose his memory. He's starting to second guess himself. He's also discovered that the suit is now no longer using his web shooters and is now making its own webs, so making its own little things it can use. So it's starting to think more for itself. So that's really interesting, and you notice that in the episode as well. And I like the design of this half and half transition, which is what Insomniac sort of did. Because that suit there that you can see in the background is for me sort of like the half and half. Because you get elements of the advanced suit in that suit, but not completely. So I really like that suit. And then the third variant, which you get in the third episode, looks like this. And it is just literally a full-on symbiote suit. There is no webbing at all. His eyes are a little bit more sharper, and the spider logo looks a lot more like the Venom symbiote logo. And at this point, Peter has been completely taken over by the symbiote. He's a lot more aggressive. His outfit style has changed from Peter's usual casual look to he's wearing this like black t-shirt, which is pretty much the symbiote, just embodying him. Yeah, and he's a lot more aggressive towards his friends, and he's making some very rash decisions. But I'm glad that you can see that transition. So as the suit changes, you see Peter change. And I think that's why it's really good, and that's why it's done the best, if I'm being perfectly honest. So in terms of design, I think personally, I really do like the Insomniacs design, don't get me wrong, but I think the way they do it in this show, they do it better, if I'm perfectly honest. So I really like the design of the symbiote suit in Spectacular Spider-Man. But now that I've talked about the design, I am going to talk about the design more when we get into the episodes. But I think it's time we break down each individual episode. So let's start with the first episode. So I'll do a little cut. Let's start with the first episode that Peter gets the symbiote suit, known as Persona. Okay, so breaking down the episode. So the first episode that Peter gets the symbiote is season 1, episode 10, Persona. And this is where he gets obviously just the basic black variant of his costume. And it's really, really good. And it's quite a fun little episode. So you sort of get a tease of the symbiote at the end of the previous episode, episode 9, the uncertainty principle. Where you see Colonel John Jameson finding the symbiote attached to his space shuttle. And then that continues into the next episode where it's landed. Peter arrives home. He's desperate to see it on the TV. He's surprised Aunt May hasn't got it on. But when he turns it on, he sees that they're talking about the symbiote, that they found alien life out there, and that they've taken it back to Empire State University where Peter works and in his spare time for Dr. Connors and stuff. For Dr. Connors to experiment on and test it. You know, he phones Eddie Brock, which in this show I quite like because Eddie Brock and Peter have this very brotherly relationship. They've got that bond together, which I think makes it better then later on because you really see how their relationship teeters from here. But yeah, they call each other, have a little bit of discussion. Peter's not unfortunately allowed to see the symbiote, but he knows that Spider-Man possibly could. So later that night, he goes to check out the symbiote, but notices that someone is breaking in to try and steal it. Who is that person? That is Black Cat. They sort of have a little bit of a fight. Peter tries to stop her. However, the symbiote slips out of the containment unit in the meantime and ends up accidentally attaching itself to Peter's foot without him realizing. Black Cat escapes, tripping the alarm as Dr. Connors comes in. And Spider-Man just swings away, but all Connors sees is Black Cat, Spider-Man, and then the symbiote's gone missing. So he unfortunately thinks that Spider-Man has taken it because they're not in really good favours at the moment. So he thinks that Spider-Man has taken it. But as Peter's like swinging around, he fails to notice that the symbiote is then moved from his foot. I don't know why it took so long for the symbiote to do that because it was nighttime and then it's like daytime. So why the symbiote took so long, I don't know. But the symbiote then engulfs his suit, changing it fully into the black suit. And then he finally notices that he's got the black suit. He accuses Black Cat of being the thief, but then realizes he's wearing it. Not sure how he got it. but then he starts using it to save some people who are in danger, noticing how it's made him feel more energized. He's able to do things he couldn't do normally. It's almost like upgraded his spiderness, he says. Um, but then he sort of gets these little thoughts in his head that maybe it's better if he keeps it rather than lets a villain possibly take it again. So it's like a subtle corruption there, but not quite that. But all I do like is when he eventually arrives home, he sees the symbiote just folds back in on itself, hiding underneath his clothes, and I think that is really, really cool the way it does that. But he does go in and sees that Aunt May is sort of being a bit iffy. She's not really herself. She seems to have done like an awful lot of cooking as well. So he wants her to just rest. Also, there's a subplot in this episode with Chameleon trying to steal Spider-Man's identity and make him look bad, which is quite interesting that you do that in an episode where Spider-Man's got a brand new suit. I don't know. There's something about that I think is quite funny. But Black Cat lets Spider-Man know that there's something going on this yacht in the middle. There's a yacht with this party going on, and like J. Jonah Jameson and all's on it. That Chameleon's planning on stealing from, and so they sort of go out there together to try and stop him. Chameleon is actually disguised as Spider-Man, and Spider-Man has a little bit of a fight with Chameleon, sort of testing out his new powers and strength. And you can see little elements of what the symbiote can do for Peter. Like there's a point where a laser like cuts the suit, and he looks at it, almost like thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna have to sew that up." But then the symbiote just closes the gap back together. So you can see the subtle intelligence of the symbiote in little bits and pieces. But Peter's still his usual self. He's still pulling quips. He's still like pulling his punches a little bit. He's still just being himself, really, as if he was still in his normal outfit. And that's the point. And I really like this episode. It's quite a fun episode. And the inclusion of Chameleon was an interesting one. So you sort of get to see the two sides of Spider-Man there. You get to see the black suit taking on the red and blue suit, the old and the new. It is quite interesting. So I quite like the episode Persona. And the episode ends with like Black Cat and Spider-Man sort of having a little chat and sort of think, you sort of get this sort of vibe of, will they, won't they? Could he be swung now that he's in the black suit? Who knows? But I like in these episodes as well, it plays the usual spectacular theme, but then it always transitions into a little darker variant with like symbiote tendrils enclosing the screen, and I think that's quite interesting as well. Which I quite liked in Insomniac as well, where it was like they're better together, and then you see the symbiote going over the together, and then Miles' electric had to just blow that away. So I thought that was quite interesting. But yeah, and that's pretty much Persona in a nutshell. I quite like the episode, quite fast paced. Nothing feels too slow. And yeah, you sort of get that initial transition with Peter. He's the same, but he just feels better, and that's the thing. And he has like subtle hints in his mind, whereas normally he would originally just give the suit back straight away. He's sort of like umming and ahhing. So there's a little bit of change, but not too much to worry about. But that's episode 1. Changes start to really happen when we get into episode 2. So let's jump straight into episode 2 of the symbiote arc, known as Group Therapy. So now we're moving on to season 1, episode 11, Group Therapy. Which this is a really interesting one. It's probably my favourite of the 3 episodes. So it starts off with Max Dillon, who is Electro, getting released from Ravencroft because he's been rehabilitated. He's recovered from his previous fights with Spider-Man, which I think is interesting. But he's allowed to keep his power suit, which I think is quite a bit of a weird choice. But yeah, and he ends up breaking out the rest of Spider-Man's rogue gallery that we saw earlier in the series, because this is a Sinister Six episode, which I love the concept of the Sinister Six, and I love it. Insomniac did it in their first game, and we nearly had it in Spider-Man No Way Home, but not quite. We had the Sinister Five. But yeah, so he releases the Sinister Six, which in this is, and I had to write it down again, yeah, it is Electro, it's Rhino, it's Vulture, it's Shocker, it's Dr. Octopus, and it's Sandman. So, and you've seen all those villains be taken out individually by Spider-Man throughout the series, so now they've all come together. So they all break out, they get their suits, and they're tentacles back and all sorts, and they want to get revenge on Spider-Man pretty much. Then you cut back to Peter, meanwhile, you've noticed a little bit of a change in Peter. He's still feeling a bit groggy, but also still feels really energized at the same time. And he picks up the suit from under his bed, because he keeps it under his bed at this point. Still obviously showing that the symbiote will leave him and they're a bit separate. But it then like morphs onto him, and he compliments how it's a lot easier than putting on his normal costume. He then tries to get his web shooters, and he realizes the first big change, that now he doesn't need to. The symbiote is now producing its own webbing, which he thinks is really cool at the time, but little do we know that's the subtle changes happening. He goes downstairs and notices Aunt May is still not feeling great. Aunt May had made plans to go to the theatre with Anna Watson, but it's unsure she wants to go, but Peter sort of convinces her to go, saying that it'll be good for her. So eventually she does go. But meanwhile, Peter goes back to Empire State University and bumps into Eddie, and they sort of have a little bit of a tiff, because they're not really best buddies anymore, especially after the stunt Peter pulled in the last episode, where we found out that he took photos of Black Cat stealing news but didn't call the police. And then there was a previous incident when Doc Connors was the Lizard, and the same thing happened again. So Eddie no longer trusts Peter, and he sort of says that they can no longer be friends. So their rift has now fully started now. So after that, you can tell the symbiote's starting to take over Peter, because he starts talking to himself in his head, thinking that, who needs him? Who needs them? We don't need them. So you can tell that it's starting to influence his decisions a little bit. He notices a car chase, which leads him to the Sinister Six, where it leads him to Rhino, and then slowly, one by one, all the villains come out and surround Spider-Man. But they just so happen to be attacking the theatre where Aunt May is. He does save Aunt May, but due to all the stress and everything that's going on, she ends up collapsing. We find out later that she's actually had a heart attack. Peter, unable to defeat the Sinister Six, escapes into the sewers, and the Sinister Six follow him. But then they eventually have to regroup to determine what they're going to do next. Peter, unsure how he's going to take on the Sinister Six, decides to get an early night. But late into the night, he hears on a police radio report that the Sinister Six are attacking, and the suit decides to take it upon itself to put itself on Peter and drag his body to the fight while Peter's asleep. Insomniac did that as well, where the symbiote just wears Peter rather than Peter wearing the symbiote. And you can tell the difference, because when he fights the Sinister Six, he does not talk at all. He doesn't speak. And his actions are all a lot more aggressive. Even some of the Sinister Six pull him up on it. I think Doc Ock pulls him up on it. Rhino might pull up on it. I know Doc Ock definitely pulls him up on it. Telling him that he's like, no quips, arachnid, and stuff like that, no jokes. I think Rhino does, because he's planning on impaling him and says, too scared to pull one last joke. But you notice the moves that Spider-Man is doing in that. He's being a lot more aggressive. He's not pulling his punches, and he's doing a lot of dangerous stuff, not caring about the surrounding area around him either. But that's because of the symbiote at that point controlling him. And right at the end, this is like the turning point. He's defeated the Sinister Six, but it's just Doc Ock left. The police and Captain Stacy have all arrived, and he's holding one of Otto's tentacles and looks like he's about to impale Otto in it and pretty much kill him. But Captain Stacy stops him, and that causes him to snap out of it a little bit, and then he flees the scene. So he nearly kills Otto. And then you wake up the next morning, Peter's got a big scar on his arm. He has no memory of what's just happened or how he's got that scar, but then sees the newspaper outside saying the Sinister Six is being defeated and they're behind bars again. Photos by Peter Parker, but he doesn't remember any of that. But then he sort of gets a suspicion that maybe the symbiote did it. So he's starting to get concerned, but that influence is still taking a hold of him a little bit, saying maybe it's for the best. The symbiote stopped the Sinister Six, so maybe it'll be fine, which is not how Peter should be acting. And then MJ comes to the house to inform Peter that she's had a heart attack and is in hospital. and he needs to go see her immediately. And that's sort of where the episode ends. So now you can see the transition happening. The suit has changed. It's developing its own webbings. Peter's making more rash decisions. The symbiote's trying to take him over a little bit. He's being a little bit more aggressive. So this is the middle ground now. He is starting to change. When he's in control, he is still doing his quips, but there is a noticeable difference. But we've got one more episode of this Symbiote Saga to discuss. And again, it is a really interesting one. And the change in Peter is dramatic from here. So let's jump straight into episode 3, Intervention. We have made it to the final episode now, which is season 1, episode 12, Intervention. Now this is where Peter's symbiote arc comes to its climax. He's fully consumed by the symbiote at this point. His costume has gone to that full-on symbiote, no spider webbing. He's not pulling his punches, and he's at his most aggressive. In this episode, he blows off all of his friends. He's sad, obviously, because he starts the episode, obviously, seeing Aunt May in the hospital, learning about the medical bills, that this is gonna, it's gonna cost a lot. He is worried about her. He's got his other issues going on in the meantime. So he goes back to his school, where his friends try to comfort him, but he sort of blows them off quite aggressively. Saying like they can't do anything to help, or if they want to help, pay for his medical bills, So he blows them off. He has multiple confrontations with Eddie. He even goes to Tombstone in order to try and solve some of the issues, get some more money, which is something that Spider-Man would never do, being really, really aggressive. And Tombstone says, for him to stop fighting normal crime, which Spider-Man just readily agrees to, which is completely wrong, and Spider-Man would never do that. So that is just the symbiote just fully taking over Peter's mental state there. But also, you notice in this episode, this is the episode in particular where the eyes start to become we's. Like when he's having a full-on confrontation with Eddie Brock, he pins him up against the wall and says, "We're tired of your whining." So rather than "I'm tired of your whining," "We're tired of your whining." And yeah, it starts to get implemented a lot more then. So you can see how the symbiote has now taken a hold of Peter. He's had it long enough now to where it's got the hold on him now. But he does eventually snap out of it when Flash comes to him saying that, he shouldn't be blowing off his friends, and he didn't expect that from Peter. They're only trying to help you. Why are you being like this? And Peter realizes that even when Flash is making sense, then something is wrong. So he decides to go to the signature church that you would see in like Spider-Man 3 in order to try and remove the symbiote. And the symbiote's obviously fighting back at this point, constantly saying, no, we need each other, we can help you, stop, we're great together. But then the thing that snaps Peter out of it is when it starts saying people it doesn't need, we don't need MJ, we don't need Gwen, and then it stops, but it's about to say we don't even need Aunt May. And that's when Peter's like, nope, that's not my fault, and so tries to take it off, but the symbiote fights back and entraps Peter within his own mind. And then you get nice flashbacks. There's a long sequence of about 8 to 10 minutes where Peter starts going down a trip down memory lane to Uncle Ben, losing Uncle Ben, sort of the symbiote trying to say like, oh, but if we were together, these things wouldn't happen, and we can stop these things happening, and you never have to feel like this again if we're together, and you don't really need all these other people. But Uncle Ben is sort of there to sort of guide Peter, and I quite like that. That is quite nice. And in the end, they sort of, when Peter finally realizes he doesn't need the symbiote anymore, he's listened to Uncle Ben's advice. Peter puts on the red suit again in his mind and sort of takes on the black suit. They sort of have an internal fight, which he eventually wins due to basically the power of friendship, which is, is corny, cringy, but is fine for a show like this, and it makes sense in the context of it all, that his friends are there behind him and he shouldn't blow them off. But he does win, and then he ends up removing the suit, taking it back to the containment unit at Connor's lab, where Eddie Brock is there. He congratulates Spider-Man, thanks Spider-Man for bringing it back, but Spider-Man's planning on killing it. He sets the temperature really low to freeze it. Eddie then gets angry at Spider-Man. He's already angry at Peter, but now he's angry at Spider-Man, swearing revenge on Spider-Man. The symbiote hears this, breaks out of the ice, and merges with Eddie, telling him that Peter is actually Spider-Man. And so together, they become Venom and then seek revenge on both Peter Parker and Spider-Man. So yeah, it's to be honest, the pacing of this episode is a little bit off, but I do like the concepts that go on here. I like that you see the change in Peter now. He's not making quips. He's very serious in the way he talks. He blows people off. He changes from the I's to the we's, the us's as well. The symbiote is taken over at this point, and that gradual progression that we've seen over the last 2 episodes really comes to a climax here. And I love the internal scenes with Uncle Ben and everything. I think it's brilliant. It's a really good end to the saga. Obviously, there's another episode after this, but that's with Eddie having the symbiote and Venom, which I'm not discussing in this series. Could do another series for Venom, but I'm just focusing on Peter with the symbiote. So that is all 3 of the episodes. So I'm going to pause this and I'm going to give you my final thoughts on the Spectacular Spider-Man symbiote arc and let you know what will be part 4 of the symbiote arc. Here we are at the end of my Spectacular Spider-Man symbiote arc video. I hope you did enjoy this. But yeah, so after looking at the background, the design, and the episodes, I think it's safe to say that Spectacular Spider-Man, at least so far in terms of this symbiote arc, we've still got more to come, but in terms of what I've done so far, I think for me, Spectacular Spider-Man did it the best. They had the best sort of designs of the symbiotes in terms of the way they progressed it. I do really like Insomniac's design, don't get me wrong, but I think they did it right in Spectacular with the progression. The full, just plain black suit to half symbiote to then full symbiote, and matched Peter's personality with it. That's the key thing as well. Peter's personality matched. Whereas in things like Spider-Man 3, you didn't really notice much of a change in his personality because Peter in that movie in particular was being a little bit off before even getting the symbiote. So there wasn't much of a change. And then in Insomniac, it was done okay, but it was just rushed, in order to fill that game time. And because they knew they had to get Venom in there. But this was done a lot better. And I think it's because of the TV series format they can. But yeah, it was done really, really well. I loved it, the slow progression. I thought it was done really, really well. Really, really great. So I think, this is probably my favourite of the symbiote arc so far, if I'm being perfectly honest. But which symbiote arc am I going to do next? So we've done a video game, we've done a movie, and we've done a TV series. But even though we've already done a TV series, there is one in particular I really would like to do next. And the one that I would like to do next, and I think is going to be part 4 of the symbiote arc, is going to be the 1990s animated TV series. Because I really want to do that one. And because there is one clip and scene in particular that everyone knows we wanted it to be in that game, where Spider-Man, as Black Suit, is chasing after Shocker up a bell tower, and he screams after him in one of the funniest little scenes I've ever seen in my life. So I'm looking forward to doing that one. So that will be part 4 of the Symbiote Saga, the 1990s TV show, which ran for a long time. And again, like Spectacular, is another one that a lot of people want to be continued because it ended on a cliffhanger, trying to find where is Mary Jane Watson. So that is going to be it for part 3 of the Symbiote Saga. I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, please like it by giving it a thumbs up. Comment down below your thoughts on Spectacular Spider-Man in general and its symbiote arc. And subscribe if you are new. But for now, this is the Nerdy Grail signing off. I hope you have an amazing day, and I will see you all next time. Bye for now, everyone.